one of these founders who I really admire, he like started laughing at me on the call, and he's like, "What do you mean, like $20,000?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "You're not serious." I was like, "What do you mean I'm not serious?" Like, Benji, if you can't raise $20,000 from just your classmates, like ask somebody for 500, ask somebody for 1,000, ask somebody for 1,500, ask somebody for 2,000. If you can't find 20 classmates to give you $500, you're a joke. And so many companies pivot, but when you're going through it, you feel like you're a bad founder, you feel like you're unable, you feel like you didn't make good decisions before. And it's a process of learning all of that together. And I think too many companies pivot too late. My goal this round is to get to $100 million in revenue.
Acrew.
Yeah, if we haven't done that, we're a joke. I was like really concerned about it. And I remember speaking to our board member that I spoke to, Vlad, and he's like, "Hey, is this the first time this is happening?" I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Cool, deal with it, but expect a lot more." I don't know.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Fintech Leaders, coming to you from New York City. I'm your host, Miguel Armaza. I'm a co-founder of Gilgamesh Ventures, a venture capital fund that backs early-stage fintech entrepreneurs. If you enjoyed this conversation, I invite you to leave a review on Apple or Spotify so more people can learn about fintech leaders. In this episode, I interview Benjamin Fernandes, CEO and founder of NYCA, a global cross-border payments company that helps customers send money in and out of Africa. Founded in 2018, NYCA today is profitable and has raised over $15 million from Accel, Acrew, Amplo, Bessemer, DST, NYCA, and many more. We discuss why NYCA built their own infrastructure and stopped relying on local African banks, challenges of going through a company pivot from local to cross-border payments, the important role that VCs can have on founders, positively and negatively, how Benjamin's background as a TV host led him to payments, and a lot more. Benjamin, welcome to New York.
Thank you.
Thanks for being here. Thanks for meeting me down in Soho. You're here for the UN meetings, is that right?
Correct.
How's that going?
It's going good. It was pretty fascinating to see all these presidents and members of parliament or central bankers all in one place. And it's a great if you're trying to get licenses in emerging markets. It's one of the best spots to be in, so you can just talk to a bunch of people at the right spot. I work in licenses, so that's most of the reason I'm here.
It's great for you, not so great for traffic in New York.
Not at all.
Yeah. Benjamin, I want to start by hearing about a specific part of your background, and that's your time as a TV host. I'm sure that comes in handy for recruiting, for fundraising, for selling, just presenting in general.
Yeah, I mean, TV, I never expected to get into. I was 17 years old. I used to play football, and I used to talk a lot. And one of the presenters who was covering local news came up to say, "Hey, Q, would you like to be a TV host?" And I was like, "No." And I know you should try doing it. And I was like, "Okay, sure, let me try it." Started local TV when I was 17 years old. Moved to national TV when I was 19. My big project was the Euros in 2012, and then the Olympics in London in 2012. And that was my first big break in television, moving to national TV. But TV is what got me involved in payments. So while TV was growing as an industry, mobile money and M-Pesa was growing as well in Eastern Africa. And my boss said, "Hey, can you enable us to pay for TV subscription on mobile money?" And that was one of the first projects I did in 2011. So working on an ability to be able to pay for subscription services on mobile money for TV payments.
Did you get any training, or was it just like...
Oh gosh, TV is a brutal industry to be in. It's a tough one. Man, when I first started my first shows, I got a lot of brutal feedback. I've probably heard almost every insult you can tell me. I think it's much harder when you're a 19-year-old hearing that, or a 17, 18, 19-year-old, because you take it so personally. And most of the comments were positive in general, but there's always that 5 to 10% of the negative comments. But when you're 17 and you're 18 and you're 19 and you're reading that, it's pretty hard. Yeah. I had a really good boss that would always encourage me. And I was like, "Oh, Benji, don't worry about this. Stay focused." And just told me, like, if you're able to keep users' attention on TV, that means we're going to get more money for sponsorship. So just focus on that. And we got some large sponsors for some of the programs because of that. And that's kind of how the TV career went on. But When I was right before going to business school, I knew that was probably the end of my TV career. And I was like, all right, this is great and it's good, but time to move on.
So you mentioned M-Pesa, and I was telling you before we started recording, when I was in banking, I was at Citi, very large global bank, and they loved to talk about innovation despite not having any innovation internally. And M-Pesa was always the case study that every MD loved to talk about leapfrogging, enabling digital payments for the bank. Tell us kind of your experience with M-Pesa, but also how has the ecosystem today changed, I guess, in Kenya, because that's primarily where M-Pesa operates, but in general in Africa.
Yeah. So mobile money is just for context for all the listeners. It's where your cell phone and your mobile carrier is your bank account. So when you register for a SIM card, it also gives you a mobile money account. And this happens in most countries in Africa. I think there's over 145 different versions of M-Pesa across the continent with 54 different countries today. And collectively, the African continent moves nearly, I think, $500 billion just on mobile money a year. It's the largest by any other continent in the world. So M-Pesa is one of the players that pioneered it in 2007 in Kenya. And ever since then, there's other services like MTN that's pushed this across Ghana, Uganda, and many other countries. And you have other deployments like Tigo in Tanzania, Airtel Money in Uganda and in Tanzania as well. And so other services have built a similar service where you literally go to any corner shop, you give them physical cash, you get a text message saying, hey, Miguel, you've just topped up 3,000 Tanzanian shillings, and you get a text message, and then you can do whatever you want with that, where you can use USSD codes. It's like back in the day in the US where you had to enter scratch cards, but that's how you send money to somebody. You just dial in a USD code or like open the mobile money app and you can like click, I want to send money to Benji. It's a very similar like Venmo or Cash App experience for our customers there. So that's huge and massive across the continent, but it's gone through many different phases of growth and challenges as well. I think the biggest challenge in my opinion is how can you create a larger enabling environment for different financial services to be built on top of mobile money, like services like M-Pesa, like MTN, like Halotel, like Tigo, like Airtel across the continent. And that for me is still not resolved at scale, which also limits the potential of other services being built on top. For example, if mobile money is your primary wallet, in the United States, you have large SaaS businesses here where you can direct debit, charge people every month for a service. Now, if you look at a continent like Africa, where there's 1.2 billion people today, by 2050, it's going to be 2.5 billion people. With mobile money today, you can't do direct debit charges on people. So there's a whole plethora of software businesses that are yet to be built, that will be built over the next 10 to 15 years across the continent when you can do things like that on mobile money. So I think there's a maturity phase that mobile money needs to get to across the continent, which will enable other services like that and brand new markets at scale for other industries to be built on top of.
So let's zoom in on Nala. Is that how you say it, Nala?
Nala, yeah.
Yeah. Where does the name come from?
So Nala comes from a Swahili Bantu word that means a beautiful gift. Nala is also the lioness and lion king, and lionesses actually do more hunting than the male lion, so it's the financial divider for the family.
Okay. Where did Nala get started?
Wow. Well, in business school, when I was in business school.
GSB?
Yeah. So I never thought, first of all, I never knew I was going to go to business school. I was first in our family to go to college with my sister. Neither of my parents have been to college. So even getting the chance to come to America for that was a privilege. And then I moved back. I was working in television. And then when I was 21, I got this full scholarship to go to GSB. So GSB gave about 8 scholarships a year to 8 African students. And that's how I got to come to the Bay Area. And that's from business school. Being 21 in business school is not the easiest thing to do.
Yeah. So I was 10 years older.
Yeah. So I mean, I think our average class age is 28 or 29 years old. So you're closer to the average versus me. And so I think it was really tough. I think people go to business school for 3 reasons. Either one, you want to advance that same career you're in. So let's say you're consulting, you're a junior, you want to become a partner. So that same industry, just advance and like become more senior. The second reason for me is to pivot to an industry you're interested in. So like, let's say you're working in healthcare, you want to go to Fintech, so you use business school to do that. And the third reason is exploration. So like, let's say you're in healthcare and you want to explore 5 different industries. You use a summer, you use different classes to explore what that could look like. And category 2 and 3 is either you get into that industry and work in it, or you build a company in them. And so I was definitely in category two more. Also, I was leaving the media and television industry. I was really passionate about payments and technology. I didn't even know the word fintech really. I would always complain to my friends like, oh, why did you know in Africa this is broken and that's broken? And my classmates would always tell me, Benji, why don't you do something about it? And I never thought I was going to be a founder. I was really young in the class, obviously. I didn't come from a family where with tech companies and building tech companies was normal, especially in Africa. And being around so many people who pushed me was the foundation for where the potential of starting NYCA could be. And I remember one day I took a class at business school and they're like, hey, Benji, pick an idea to work on. So I just made something up and I just called it NYCA. And like, that's kind of how it started. More as like homework for the class. But then as I was doing the homework for the class, I was like, oh, this is really interesting. And I'd worked at the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation that summer. And instead of flying back there, I had a couple of job offers for two large tech companies, pretty large in the Bay Area. And I was like, okay, do I go back there or do I try to start this company? And I had all the excuses of why I shouldn't start this company. I was like, I'm too young, I'm inexperienced, I've never managed people at scale before. Everybody I'm hiring is going to be older than me. I have no money. And when I was talking to other entrepreneurs and I told them like, yeah, I have no money, they're like, wait, how much do you need? I was like, I don't know, $20,000, $30,000. And one of these founders who I really admire, he like started laughing at me on the call and he's like, what do you mean, like $20,000? I was like, yeah. He's like, you're not serious. I was like, what do you mean I'm not serious? Like, Benji, if you can't raise $20,000 from just your classmates, like ask somebody for 500, ask somebody for 1,000, ask somebody for 1,500, ask somebody for 2,000. If you can't find 20 classmates to give you $500, you're a joke. You shouldn't be a founder. And when he said that to me, I was a bit annoyed, but I was like, he's got a good point. So I was like, I never come from a culture of raising money for a company. My culture, we raise money for weddings and celebrations. Like that's the norm. But for a company, that's not normal. So I was also scared of asking people for money because I was scared, what if I fail? I didn't want Miguel to not talk to me. I didn't want to not be friends with them. So it was never something that I always knew I was going to do was start a company. I knew I was very annoyed and passionate about solving something in the payment space for the African continent. I didn't think I was going to be the founder doing it though.
And did you raise from your class?
Not till later. So we never raised around. So NYCA's been through a couple iterations. The latest iteration is about 2 years old. But, definitely, eventually we got into Y Combinator. So I applied to YC a few times. So got rejected a bunch of times. And most people like, oh, NYCA came out of nowhere, just applied to YC and got in. We were the first East African company in YC. And so it was not normal for them to take companies from our region, and usually it was mostly Nigerian companies coming in. And when we got in, I was like, okay, cool, let's try to build this. And that YC was a whole different ballgame of challenges. One night before demo day, my co-founder comes up to me, he's like, hey, I'm quitting. And I was like, wait, what? He's like, yeah, it's technical co-founder. He's like, hey, so it basically came down to picking whether you want to build a relationship with his wife or the company. And I was like, all right, man, like, I'm not going to blame this. I want to be respectful for what you want to do. And he didn't see the long-term future for where the business could go. So I was like, cool, like, if that's how he feels today, it's probably best he exits now versus later. And that was tough going through a co-founder breakup right before demo day. We had a bunch of investors pull out because he wasn't coming on. And just trying to build a business with no technical co-founder was really tough. So we went through a lot of different challenges as a business. So we were growing. Yeah, that was one of them.
Building a company without a technical co-founder, especially you not having a technical background, right? Sounds tough. How did the company look like in the years post YC?
Yeah. So post YC, so the things I picked up were we never had a designer, so I became our UI UX designer. I learned Figma myself. I learned how to draw stuff, and I was always pretty good with design. I used to be TVO, so before you come a TVO, you have to learn how to do video editing. That was like always rule number one. And then with video editing, you have to create your own images and post. So I learned Photoshop, I learned InDesign, all that old stuff taught from YouTube. So all that stuff came pretty natural to me. And then obviously I'm still not technical, so I was like, okay, what do we do here? Because YC, given us, I think it was like $120,000 then. So I was like, okay, well, let me try to find some people. So I went to Angel List. I was looking at people like for jobs. And I met one engineer, so I hired him. I hired this other engineer in Tanzania. So both of them, Bertha and Mahmoud, they're my first engineers I had brought on. And I was like, cool. So like, I'll write the tickets. Let's draw this. I'll do the UI UX design. Can you guys just build stuff? And it was all built around people's feedback. So one thing we were always been good at as a company was talking to customers. Even today, if I show you my WhatsApp, I have 1,600 unread messages. It's mostly customer feedback. So always try to keep close to customers. Then like, okay, this is what the most customers are saying. This is basic on the segment we're trying to focus on. This is what I think we should prioritize building. And I'd write all of the product tickets myself. And then engineering team would build it and we'd sit down together and so on. So I think that's how we got over. And then how I ended up finding my CTO. It took me about 11 months to find a CTO because I just want to find some random person. Obviously, when you finish YC, you have like this little halo and glow for like a few months only, and then you're gone. So like for those few months, like we were like kind of talking about like Onala, but they didn't really realize what I had gone through. And co-founder breakup, and the company wasn't doing well at all. And I interviewed a bunch of people. I was just basically on LinkedIn. I had a whole spreadsheet, and I was like, I had worked in payments in Africa. I wanted somebody who worked in digital banking in Europe or the UK. That was like my criteria. It was like, how do I blend the two talents together? So I met Nico, my CTO. He built Osprey, it was a kids digital bank in the UK like 10 years ago. They were backed by Index, raised $10 million. Osprey ended up failing and crashing. And then he went to Monzo, where he was an engineer there for a little bit of time. And then he went to Typeform, a security engineer. Then he went to ComplyVantage, where he built transaction monitoring with Charlie. But what was interesting about Nico is he grew up in Africa. So he was British person, and then he grew up in Africa. He moved to France when he was 14. And so he always had this passion for the region, and I think we really clicked and aligned on that. And he was kind of burnt out from UK Fintech and was looking to do something more curious. And actually, for one of the first questions I asked, I was like, what's the best company in the UK in Fintech? And he's like, TransferWise. And I was like, oh, interesting. He's like, yeah, I love the cross-border payment space. That time, we weren't even doing anything in cross-border payments. We were doing like a domestic payment service. This is before a couple pivots. And I ended up hiring him. And a few months later, we ended up pivoting to build a cross-border payments business.
Yeah, I had Milan Paris, I think that's how you pronounce his name, on the podcast. He's the chief product officer of Wise. And that's probably the episode that has gotten the most positive feedback from founders. Clearly an amazing company. I want to talk about something you mentioned, which is staying close to the customer. Obviously, crucial, super important. Yeah. I have heard from some of your investors that you've been very good at bootstrapping and building communities of investors. Of communities of maybe zooming in around immigrant communities, or maybe share a bit about those strategies that you've implemented.
Yeah. So for context for everybody, just to bring you up to speed kind of how that all happened. So in 2020, 2021, we pivoted from a domestic payment service to doing cross-border payments business. So starting with remittances from the UK to Kenya. Now, I'd never lived in the UK before. I never lived in Kenya before either. So I'm like, great, that's the first place we have approvals in. What do we do? Now, we had trimmed the team down. I think we're about 5 or 6 people at this point. And going through a pivot, first of all, is really tough. And if any founders listening to this and going through it, I support you. I really admire what you're trying to do. And if you ever want to talk about the pivot, please reach out to me, because going through that pivot is never easy. We had to go through a layoff. We had staff quit on us who didn't believe in the new pivot. And so many companies pivot, but when you're going through it, you feel like you're a bad founder. You feel like you're unable. You feel like you didn't make good decisions before. And it's a process of learning all of that together. And I think too many companies pivot too late. And when I saw we didn't have retention, I needed to make the call myself, ultimately, as the CEO and the founder of the business. So I was like, all right, I want to pivot. And what we started seeing was patterns in cross-border payments where, because of COVID, there was an increase in international money transfers happening to Africa because people couldn't travel and carry cash on planes. So we started seeing the average transaction value increasing massively, literally over like 6 months. I was like, wow, that's fascinating. Let's dig into this more. Now, when I lived in the US, I used to send money to my parents as well. So I used almost every remittance app or service, MoneyGram, Western Union, Remitly, TransferWise. Almost all of them I'd use myself, and all my friends who were migrants used them as well. So I was like, cool, this is a market I understand really. So I started calling my friends. I was like, okay, what's the behavior? How do you pick what to send with? When do you send? What's the frequency of send? What are you sending the money for? Why? What do you wish you could do that doesn't exist today? So I was trying to identify patterns. Now, because our first market was UK and Kenya, I never lived in either country. So I didn't have Kenyan friends in the UK who were sending money back to Kenya. Because remember, our customers don't live in Africa, they live in the US, UK, and Europe. So at the time, during the pandemic, one of the best apps that helped me was Clubhouse. So
I remember.
I would sit on Clubhouse and I'd go to these random Kenyan WhatsApp group, Kenyan chats. Because I speak Swahili, I'd just jump in there and I'd speak Swahili. And for context, like Tanzanian Swahili is like really good. Kenyan Swahili is like a little bit of a blended version of, so it's like Swahili and English. So I'd go and speak Swahili, be like, who's this Indian looking guy that speaks really fluent Swahili, but calls himself African and has a Mexican last name? So everyone was curious, like, who's this person? So when I'd go in there, I'd be able to command an audience and built a large following on Clubhouse. And what I'd do with that was I was trying to I'd talk to like 90-year-olds in the UK, and I'd try to get to their parents. Because I knew they were broke, they're not going to send any money back to Kenya. So voice builds trust. And I knew if I could use my voice and build trust with them, I'm going to show you on my phone. If I just open here and I type in Clubhouse on my phone, you can see a bunch of people on Clubhouse. Yeah. And then if I type in Nala user, you can see all these users that came.
Hundreds.
Yeah. Our first 650 customers were onboarded because of Clubhouse. The first 200 customers, I did one-on-one onboardings on Zoom.
You got more money out of Clubhouse than
Clubhouse. Probably. I mean, Clubhouse helped us a bunch. So I had this manual spreadsheet, and how we built the community was I'd write down the person's name, like say it was Miguel, and I'm like, okay, when I may reach out to Miguel, and then I try to look at their profile, because like Clubhouse, you can connect to Instagram. So I'm literally go mind, like, what is Miguel interested in? So I'd ping Miguel, like trying to do a voice chat with him, and like, hey, I love your advice, and this is what I'm trying to build. And then I'd do a Zoom call with Miguel. Most of Zoom calls were a waste of time, but I had no other choice. So I was like, I can't fly to the UK. I hold a Tanzanian passport, and Tanzania canceled COVID, so I couldn't even get to the UK. So I was like, okay, how do I figure it out? Now, Miguel, when I was doing these Zoom sessions with people, it would get to the screen where enter your card details. Man, dude, everybody would just like exit the call or drop or then block me on WhatsApp, could like block me into Clubhouse. Like, I mean, think about it. Like some random dude in Tanzania, you're living in London, is like messaging you saying, some random Indian-looking dude with a Mexican last name who speaks Swahili is messaging you from Africa.
You only knew to say you were a prince.
Yeah, I was about that's all I was missing. Telling them I was a prince, but telling them to enter your card details. Trust me, the money's gonna get delivered. Trust me, bro. Oh my goodness, people just blocked me. I got reported on WhatsApp. So like I was blocked from WhatsApp for like 4 days because I was messaging too many people with like links to download an app on test flight. So all that was happening, and remember, we're going to this pivot. Runway is running out of money, and I'm like, okay, we just got to make this work. I was like, can we get to our first 100 customers? Can we get to our first 200 customers? So what we did, I knew if I got Miguel to do one test transfer, people trust what their friends use, especially in payments. My rule is 3. If Miguel trusts me, he could give me a maximum of up to 3 people. Because most people send money to the same 3 people, maximum. Mm-hmm. If you even look at your sending behavior, even on Venmo, or if you're remitting back to like another country, most people send to their mom, maybe their dad, and maybe on a special occasion, a cousin or uncle or auntie, maximum. So I knew if I got Miguel to give me 2 people, that was a win. So I have this spreadsheet I can even show you that I built in 2021 where I'm, okay, this is Miguel, these are the 2, and I would literally draft a message for him on WhatsApp and send it to him and ask him to forward it to 2 friends. And all I wanted was those 2 friends. So on the spreadsheet, I'd manage that and I'm like, okay, how do I get to those next 2 friends? How do I get those next 2 friends? Because we're running out of money. We didn't have a budget to go and do promotions in the UK. And I'm living in Tanzania trying to acquire customers in England, which is a nightmare. So finally, we get to 100 customers. Then we get to 200 customers. Then I start pinging a few VCs. Okay, by the way, and people are like, started getting curious about the space. Obviously, it was 2021 reserve era of fundraising. So I was like, cool, can I ride this era? Got to 300 customers. Things started moving. Got to 500 customers. Then we're doubling every month. And I was like, okay, this looks really good. The growth curve was like that. So it's like fantastic. When it's a small number like that, it looks really good, right? So we started the fundraising. I think we had 5 term sheets that round in 2021. So we raised $10 million. And when we raised that $10 million, I said, all right, we're not going to raise again until we made $10 million in revenue. And that was a tough call to make. And when the market started crashing in 2022, I was like, wow, like we're very privileged as a team, as a company to raise this type of cash. And that extra cash we received from that, I was like, okay, cool, we just got to make this last. And the 2 things I said, let's focus on, I was like, let's be the best at FX, and let's be the best at payment reliability. if we do think these two things really well, our customers are going to come. I'm going to be able to scale this business. So over the last 18 months, from mid 2022 to January 2024, we just focused on those two things. In February 2024, this year, we became profitable and cash flow positive. So generating cash. And I was like, okay, wow, we're making way more money than we're spending. And getting from that stage of going from $0 in revenue to where we were in February 2024, I won't disclose the number, but it was good. It was much more money than we had raised. So it's over $10 million. So I think what I'll say is...
You exceeded your target.
Yeah, from $0 to $10 million in revenue within, I think, 16 months. So that for me was like a big win for us. And it was tough. We had to make a lot of hard calls as a company. The team was like, hey, look at this competitor. They're doing this and they're sponsoring that event and they're doing this, they're here. I'm like, we can't. And our growth team, till we raised this last round of $40 million, was just 4 people.
That's insane.
And the 4th person you're looking at. So it's 3.
How big was their last round?
$40 million.
40. So is your new goal to exceed 40 million revenue until you raise another dollar?
My goal this round is to get to $100 million in revenue.
100.
Yeah. If we haven't done that, we're a joke.
Good.
Yeah. That's the plan. So like the team knows the expectation. Like for us, I care a lot about the revenue generated per employee. And we actually calculate that every single time we add a new employee, we're like, okay, is this person going to be generating revenue for us? Our biggest team is engineers and all, so it's probably the most expensive. And then customer support, obviously, in ops, especially as we've been scaling. But, the big push for us is, are we generating cash? Are we generating profits as a company? And it needs a lot of tough decisions, a lot of debates in the office, but the writing from the wall, it does lead to tougher spots when you want to gamble on certain products. It's way harder to make those gambles.
The revenue per employee is a great metric. I was just in SF, got to interview the CEO of Wealthfront, David Fortunato. It's been important for them, but it took them a while for it to actually scale. They were at $250K per employee 4 years ago. Now they're at $1 million, which is kind of crazy. So I love hearing about your strategies, right? I've also heard that you've managed to very smartly build partnerships and relationships with the banks, with partner banks, right? How has kind of your strategy been specifically in that front?
Yeah, so the other thing that's interesting is a lot of banks want you to bring dollars. So when you're bringing in dollars to the market, you kind of have a strong leverage and say, because in markets, especially emerging markets globally, FX and foreign exchange is a big problem.
Yeah.
You see it in Latin America, you see it in Asia, you see it in Africa, same problem. And it's because a lot of these regions aren't net export regions. They import more than they export. And the countries locally aren't generating enough dollars. So importers are willing to pay a premium above mid-market rate for dollars. So therefore, banks chase you for dollars, especially if you're bringing in dollars. Do you have an ability to command and negotiate better FX rates with the banks? Now, what ends up happening, and the way I look at things strategically with banks, is reliability sucks for a majority of the banks we work with. That's just the unfortunate truth. If you think about it this way, a lot of banks aren't dedicating as much effort to build out tech teams at scale. Yeah. And there's a lot of historical banking infrastructure and legacy technology that's been built over many years. Like some of the banks use portal built from 1998. And that's still the primary portal that was built on PHP that's still being used today. And it's prone to being hacked. A lot of these banks in emerging markets in Asia and Latin America and Africa are constantly getting hacked, but they can't verbally announce it because what happens next? Everybody goes to withdraw their money. So the challenge that we face, especially with bank partners, is many banks want to work with us, but now we've been doing way more work on RDD with the banks because we've worked with banks where they're like, oh, we're super reliable. And then when we hit a certain payment volume, it just starts to tank and reliability just dies constantly. So I think there's a big opportunity in the B2B infrastructure space that creates. And what we've been trying to do strategically is making sure these relationships with the banks are in our favor. And now we interview them for why we should work with them versus them interviewing us. We've changed the power dynamic, especially when the volumes increased.
So this is what gave you the insight to launch your B2B R, your infra arm?
Yeah. Well, I think it was more we saw reliability being really bad in Africa.
Yeah.
So what do customers care about? I mean, if it's just core remittance, number one thing is FX rate and fees. So that's number one. Number two is speed of delivery. Number three is reliability of delivery. And number four is account limits. How much can I send? So what we saw with number two and number three is sometimes because a bank drops the payment, success rate was way lower. And it's not even Nala's fault. It's the bank partner we're working with's fault. But people know Nala. They don't know you're working with bank X, Y, and Z. I don't want to name them, but they know who they are. And the challenge was people would just say, we suck. And that would be the thing we hear constantly. If you look at all the negative reviews anywhere public, the number one reason is payment delay or payment failure. And all those are out of our control because we have to work with the correspondent bank or payment aggregator in the market that we're hoping that they would disperse the money successfully. Now, as we started to mature and our volume started to increase, we saw this payment more often. Between May last year and January this year, we faced an average of 25 payout per issues per month. Miguel, I wake up every morning and look at my phone or look at my Slack and say that, okay, which payment parameter is down and what are we going to tell customers? And when you're moving like 1,000 transactions a day, it's fine. When you're moving 10,000, it's a bit more painful. When you're moving 100,000 a day, maybe it costs $1 million a day, that's a problem. And that's where it becomes painful because your customer support start to face more phone calls or messages like, you guys suck, and like insulting you guys. And now you have to figure out a way to bulk respond to 6,000 customers who have a certain issue or 10,000 customers who have a certain issue in Algeria or like Cote d'Ivoire or Nigeria or a different country that you're working in. And that's not a problem that just we face. Every remittance company that services in Africa face. So we built our B2B infrastructure, not by choice, but by nature of the market. So what we started to see was reliability is bad, but not just for us, but for everybody. So it gets to a certain point where people are willing to pay premiums for reliability. And that started to become fascinating. I was like, okay, cool, let's get a license. So from 2021, we applied for 11 licenses. We received 6 of them so far. And that's like 3 years to get. That's why I'm here at UNGA. I'm like, yo, what's going on with my license? Like, why is it taking forever? Do I want to be at UNGA? No. But in markets like Africa, where it's all relationship-based, it does take the effort for me as CEO of the business to go, okay, meet the regulator. What's going on? Okay, why don't we have our license? Okay, cool. This is the issue. Okay, great. Look, this is what we're going to do. We're working on it. And we started getting a few more licenses. And then while our reliability on Nala increased, I had other remittance company CEOs call me. Hey, Benji, actually some that we've interviewed on your podcast too. Hey, Benji, can we use you guys for payouts? Hey, can we use you guys, even global payroll companies? There's 2 that have signed with us. Actually, even one here in New York, Kadana, they work with us for payouts. So payroll company want to do payouts in Africa. Can we work with you guys directly? So I was like, why not? What are the other parts? Like, reliability is really bad. I was like, okay, cool. So people come to us for reliability and FX to do treasury management for them. Because we became really good at treasury management for a consumer business, people were like, hey, can we use you guys for the payouts? And we were willing to pay a premium because of reliability. I was like, cool. So we launched a separate business called Rafiki, and that's our infrastructure business. They're all under the Nala group, but I tell the way I describe it to the team is like a water bottle. You have like the top of the water bottle, which is like our Nala consumer business. But in order for that to succeed, you have to do treasury really well and infrastructure, so reliability really well. So you end up building these 2 bases at the bottom. Now, in order to service the customer, replace the top of Nala with any other company, any other remittance company, and then the global payroll company, any other company that wants to operate a business in Africa. We'll need to have really good FX because we're converting dollars most of the time, and you have to have high reliability because you want to make sure that payments are succeeding. Now, short term it's just payouts, long term it's collections. So you have this massive ability to net transaction flows, which will increase your revenue significantly. So I think long term, that's what I'm most excited about. I'm not excited about our revenue short term. Frankly, like great, like we'll get to the $100 million, but I'm excited for like, okay, how do we get from $100 million to $1 billion in revenue? That's going to happen when you start netting funds and flows, and you're betting on a region that's going to grow. For example, Netflix today operates in 3 to 4 countries in Africa. They're trying to do collections on the local mobile money wallets and things like that. Now, who's going to do that at scale and take them to 50 countries in Africa? Or let's say they want to be in 20 next year or in 3 years. Are they going to apply for licenses in all these markets? Are they going to work with a local service that actually has coverage that's reliable enough for all these markets? Probably not. Probably doesn't exist today at scale. Now you have 54 countries in Africa. The challenge with Africa is it's so widespread. You have 54 different central banks. You have multiple currencies you have to deal with. You have currency risk you have to deal with. Currency devaluation you have to deal with. Political risk. And so it's not just quickly go and fix this problem. There's many complexities of the region, but those who build really well, they will do well long term.
Speaking of your infrastructure, you have built a way for your payments to be confirmed and sent offline.
Yeah, well, Italy, yeah.
Can you share a bit more about that?
Yeah, so basically mobile money doesn't require data. So it's all run on GSM. So basically anybody you're sending money to in Africa doesn't need a recipient app. So it'll go directly to their cell phone. So even if somebody's in a rural village, they just need a GSM connection, which connects to their local telecom, and they'll receive an SMS saying, hey, you just received $5 equivalent from Miguel, who sent you this money from the US. That money will get delivered within 1 minute. You can send money right now from New York to Tanzania, to Kenya, to Uganda, to Rwanda, to Nigeria, to Ghana, all within a minute, and the money get delivered, all through GSM.
What percentage of your flow is going through that?
Mobile money is the largest, for sure.
Largest,
yeah, by far. Well, with Nigeria, the way Nigeria is growing at its pace, mobile banking is catching up, but mobile money is by far our largest flows.
Anyone who's in payments has dealt with fraud. I don't know if you've read this book called The Founders. Is the story of PayPal by Jimmy Sonny, and one of the quotes he got was from Max Levchin, of course. And Levchin was saying, hey, building a payment system is not that hard. It's like ledger here to ledger there. The hardest part is controlling for fraud.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure this is an issue for you as well.
Yeah. It's usually for every payments company. Anybody who tells you they don't deal with fraud, they're too small. Like, you get hit with fraud.
Or under the radar.
Yeah, or they're getting hit, or they just don't announce it. I mean, it's challenging. It's pretty sad. You see a lot of criminal activity, and when sometimes I go into our portal and I review all the fraud cases, and then see what people are trying to do, and it's pretty sad. So we'll find some people in the U.S. calling older grandmas and grandpas and telling them, oh, your son or your daughter or granddaughter is kidnapped. And they'll play an Instagram video of them, and the grandma panics. They're like, oh, in order to get them out of it, you have to send $2,000 to this account. And you see, because you can hear the whole conversation, and you can see them grandma panicking, and they always target older people. So it's really sad to see, and some people lose money on that. We're very fortunate. Our CTO built transaction monitoring for Compliant Advantage, which is one of our partners as well. So it was a security engineer at Typeform. So he'd seen they were hit with fraud, and that's why he was brought into Typeform to look after what rules can they create in place to combat fraud directly. So we've been very privileged. Our fraud to volume rate is probably the lowest in the market for remittances. Our investors who did this last round, who monitor us and other companies in the remittance space, validated that. That was even my own validation. So I think the challenge we've faced, though, Miguel, is when you deal with migrants, the challenge you face is paperwork, maybe no formal SSN, and we require SSN for all our customers. So we lose a lot of customers because we don't allow a customer to transact if they don't have SSN.
And that's a social security number.
Yeah, exactly. So in the US, if you don't have SSN, you can't use dollar. And for a lot of our competitors don't require SSN. So I think for some of them, they might get hit a lot more frequently, but for us, that definitely leads to higher drop-off rates for sure, and it affects our conversion for sure. But it definitely protects us on the downside for if fraud. I'm not saying that fraud doesn't happen, but it definitely protects us significantly because people can transact without SSN or use a stolen bank card and transact. And there's many services you can just install and send $200 without a confirmation of your address and things like that.
You've mentioned your customers a lot of time. I've also heard you mention competitors. How much time do you spend thinking about your customers versus your competitors?
Mostly customers. Yeah, I mean, look, I always tell the team, the way I look at it is, look, I love football. So I'm look, we're in the third division in the English Premier League. And then we just got a new injection of cash. So this is like Manchester City 10, 12 years ago.
Good story.
2008, you get a cash injection, but it took them maybe 8 to 9 years to catch up and win their first Premier League title. Will it take us that long? I was like, I don't want to win the Premier League. I want to qualify from Division 3, Division 2, Division 1, win that Division 1, the Premier League, to get to the Champions League or the Champions League. Okay, but now we have all these big companies who've raised it, who've all long old school money. We've got the Manchester United, we've got the Chelsea, we've got the Real Madrid. It's been winning for many years. These are the transfer wises. These are the money guys. These are the Western Unions who've been in the game for a long time, who have a lot more money than we are, who are publicly listed companies and much larger teams and have scaled the business and have a global brand that people respect and know. We're the underdogs here. So I want us to pay attention to our customer and not get distracted by what our competitors are building. See what they're building, cool, that's cute. But we compete to win based on building something people need and focusing what our customer needs. And I actually think the payment space and cross-border payment space is 1% built. I think there are going to be companies that are going to be much bigger than, and now it's going to be bigger than Wise, quote me. But give us a couple of years, look, we've got massive plans ahead and there's so much for us to build. Revenue per dollar spent, if you measure effective ratio, we generate more revenue at the same time period than Wise did. And for the revenue that we generated for the dollars spent, we're up there. I can show you some of the emails that some of our investors sent us during this last round, but ratio-wise, we've done pretty well, but we've not succeeded yet. We're not a successful business yet, and I tell the team this all the time. So I think the big focus is on our customers still. And if I tell you, Miguel, pick 10 people around the world to send money to right now, and in 10 different countries, and if they can send you back the same money within 5 minutes, I'll pay you $1,000. You can't do it.
No.
It's 2024. Why? Even in developed countries. So if you're telling me, oh yeah, the cross-border payment space is already resolved and all these companies are already doing it, I'm like, we're barely getting started. Think about global trade that still needs to happen in these regions. Until that money doesn't need to get converted to USD as the primary source of currency for trade, it's not happening. So I think there's a ton of work ahead. There's going to be large unicorns being built and decacorns being built in the cross-border payment space for the next 15 years that will surprise us all.
To get there, you have to make a lot of decisions, daily, weekly, some are bigger than others. Do you have a framework on how do you make very important decisions?
Yeah, difficult decisions have obviously increased the larger the company's gotten, and there's so many consequences for every decision now. So there's revenue consequences, when the company was small, you could just say whatever and it goes. And now there's consequences of what you say as the CEO of the business, how you're perceived at the company, and that matters. How I can't make jokes that I used to make before when the company was small. I have to be respectful in a new way. It's not that I wasn't respectful, but there's a new type of conversations you can't have and can't have anymore. And that's tough. I think the responsibility, what I usually do is I have a peer group of founders I start to speak to. So some people who've been really helpful to me, like Jonas, the co-founder of Monzo, he's an investor in Nala. Ryan, the co-founder of Chime, he's an investor in Nala. Tom, the CEO of Monzo, I speak to him here and there when I have to make some big decisions, and he's been super helpful in giving me advice. Vlad, the founder of Robinhood, is an investor in Nala, so I'll message Vlad, hey, what would you do in this situation? For example, I remember last year we had a potential suit that popped up from an ex-employee, and I was really concerned about it. And I remember speaking to our board member that I spoke to, Vlad, and he's like, hey, is this the first time this is happening? I was like, yeah. He's like, cool, deal with it, but expect a lot more. Hung up. It's that was the worst and best advice in 30 seconds I've ever received. Deal with it, but expect a lot more. What do you mean? And he's like, listen, man, this is nothing. You're going to experience a lot more of these. It's not a new thing. Get over it, figure it out, move on. But just hearing that from somebody who's taking the company public normalizes that in my head, that this is not a Benji thing. It's not you've made a bad decision here. And I think getting peer feedback for difficult decisions, I think more founders need to do with each other. And that's where I seek my source of advice is just other thing, just how I keep saying is I pray. I'm a Christian, I'm a believer. So in the morning I start my day, I pray. Before going to bed, I pray, God, just give me wisdom, give me strength, give me understanding. I ask my mom and dad to pray for me. That's something that sometimes might seem awkward in the Bay Area, especially you pray. I'm yeah, I pray. But faith's a really important part of my life and my journey and how I think about decisions, especially difficult ones. But yeah, there are constantly so many difficult decisions we have to make, and it's not easy.
Yeah. What you mentioned Vlad and all these other great founders, what do they think they have in common?
So many things. I think there's few ones. Everybody's hungry to win, and I love it. It's refreshing. because when I say something that sounds crazy, they're like, yeah, let's do it. You're going to kill it. And just hearing that one phrase, yeah, you're going to kill it, from somebody like that gives me a dose of inspiration for months. And because I'm a big believer in words, man. I think words speak life into you mentally, emotionally, physically. And I remember when I was going to raise this round, I didn't think I was going to be able to do it. We weren't even profitable yet. It was like January, and I was like, okay, cool. And one of these founder friends just told me, like, hey, you're going to smash it. And I was like, whatever. But I sat on those words. I was like, okay, cool. Like, maybe we will. And in this round, we had 3 term sheets. And then we had more term sheets of people chasing us afterwards to invest in this round. It was $30 million, and we went to $40 million, so the round was 40. But in follow-on capital was probably $70 to $80 million offered to us that we couldn't take. And because I just heard that one phrase, you're going to smash it and you're going to figure this out, it just gave me drive to like go through. And so I think a lot of those founders have that in common, and strong resilience to, and so strong tolerance for nonsense. It's like, all right, that's BS, like move on, I get over it.
Yeah, the power of words. That's what I love doing the podcast. Just letting entrepreneurs like you speak is inspiring. Also, it happens to me. We invest in a founder, and they come to us with an idea that I have thought was very unlikely or almost impossible. But then they tell you like, oh wow, yes, it is possible. But the founders really have to believe it, right? And you see them turn into reality. Yeah. Do you've told us a lot about your vision for the future. Sounds like you are envisioning not just a pan-African company. I mean, today most of your team is outside of Africa. So you're building a global business. Is that right?
Correct. Yeah, for us, it's a global cross-border payments business. Sam Altman describes this really well. He always talks about you start with a small market and you attack it and you do it really well. You understand, you learn, and you scale to a bigger market. And that's what we've done in Africa. It's like, it's a market I understood really well. I know the mobile payment space really well. I was like, cool, let's do this, figure out delivery there, increase reliability. I actually think building in Africa is harder than any region in the world. Why? Because it's so fragmented, it's so broken. You literally build infrastructure, not even by choice, but you have to just build it because it doesn't exist. And you don't have to do them when building the US. You just like, oh, connect to Fintech or Stripe or whoever. Yeah, but like you're building everything at the same time, and not even by choice. And then you deal with regulators who, like, one day you wake up, there's a letter on your table, like, oh, we want to see you in this country tomorrow. I'm like, oh, but I'm in Europe. Okay, fly there. And no, I get a text message on WhatsApp from the regulator, hey, can you appear in Dar es Salaam tomorrow? We have this meeting at the central bank. I'm like, fine. I'm like finding a next flight over and traveling all the way there. So I think building in Africa is really tough. And for us, so we're launching Asia later this year. 2 markets, we're going to be testing out transactions there. And what we see it is this global cross-border business play. I think we build software fantastically as a company, and we've got a bunch of people on our team from TransferWise, from Revolut, from Monzo, on our product and engineering team that we have a couple of founders of scaled and sold businesses who have joined our team recently. That is really exciting. And I want to build this global cross-border payments business.
Do you like reading?
I do. I used to read a lot more, and now I try to find like more bite size.
Yeah.
I try to write too as well. So I try to do 1 article a month now on Medium, and I try to read Medium articles, especially from founders.
And when it comes to books or just any type of content, any kind of titles that you love to recommend or that you've enjoyed over the years?
Yeah, I think Ben Horowitz classic. He's got a Hard Thing About Hard Things. He's got also Nike founder, Shoe Dog, amazing book. I like reading Paul Graham's essays. I think those are massively helpful. Someone's got some amazing essays too. And randomly, like here and there, a good Twitter thread from a founder, or like a Twitter video interview from a founder is really helpful for me. I read my Bible. So I think books, not many. I'm always like hesitant about recommending books to people because it's really ultimately what they want to learn. And not what I care about might not be what they care about. And so I think it's the variance. And if you want to figure something out, you go find the right book for it. I do think there's one point you skipped over, though, given you said you invest into different companies. I do think investors have a very big power dynamic with founders that they don't realize. And it's scary. Miguel, when we were going through our pivot, I remember emailing all investors about our pivot. And this was in 2020, it was pandemic, it was 2021. This is before this new business grew. This was before we even got to $10 million of revenue. And a bunch of people who did respond to me when I was going through this pivot. It was my lowest moment as a founder. And I was asking for help. VCs didn't respond to me. I got VCs responding to me saying, hey, you tried your best, the company, good job. Like, I can introduce you to my portfolio companies if you want a job there. Other people offered me to get acquired by the portfolio companies. There are a bunch of people, maybe 8 to 10 VCs, told me, oh, I'm not convinced about the space. I don't think you can build a business big enough here. There's a TransferWise is already a multi-billion-dollar business. He's going public. TransferWise is going public. Western Union, MoneyGram. Like, there's no way you're going to compete in this space. And that can affect, you've already backed me as a founder, but those words were really painful for me. And there were probably some truth in there. But the sad part is, after, when I was raising this last round in February this year, in March and April this year, those same investors that wrote me those emails, like, this will never work, small market, this, Africa's tiny, blah, 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 were the same people begging for allocation this round. And it was a bit annoying because you're getting like, oh, Benji, I've always believed in you. And honestly, what I really wanted to do was send them a screenshot of their old email to me, and I was like, is this you? But I did do that. But, I was respectful with my responding to them. But it was tough because as a founder who was going through that pivot and in low moment, my morale was so low. I have employees not believing in me. I have my team quitting on me. And I've got to keep momentum up, and I've got a few months of runway left, and I'm trying to make this business happen. There were a few people that stood out to me in that low moment that came alongside, like, hey, okay, Benji, let's jump on a call. Let's figure this out together. What do you want to test out? You have 6 months of runway left. What does success look like? Those people I cherish till today, and they know who they are. And I shout them out often here and there, but those have significant influence on how a company could turn out. Now, while we're not successful yet, all those people, on paper, I've 20x their money from the valuation they invested in for what the valuation is today as a business. And as I look at this, the influence that a VC can have, in 2021, especially 2022, when we raised that $10 million, we had 5 term sheets. One of the VCs we almost took money from told me, Benji, I want you to only focus on the UK for 2 years. And then you can expand to maybe Germany or France, then maybe the US after. We need to be focused. And I told the VC, I was like, look, I want to be in the US in 6 months. And he's like, you're too American. There's a British fund. There's one of the best VC funds in the UK. Well known. If I mention the name, everybody knows the name of this fund. But the partner, you definitely know the fund. But the partner sat down with me. He's like, no, you have to be focused. You have to do this. And I understand the point. He's like, you're too American. You're overly ambitious. You're not being realistic. And that was the feedback he kept telling me. You need to be realistic. You need to be realistic. But yeah, we did end up taking money from this fund. But within 4.5 months, we launched in the US. When we were raising this round of funding, I had 1 employee in the US, and the US was number 1 for revenue. The US is number 1 for volume, with 1 employee in the US in January this year, 2024. Now, if I had listened to that guy, we would never launched the US. Because it hadn't been 2 years. But my gut instinct, and I was like, you know what, I think we could kill it in the US. And I lived there, I understand that market. I didn't live in the UK, and I can figure the US out faster. But imagine if I took that money and that partner was on my board and told me not to touch the US. We wouldn't even be having this conversation here today. I probably wouldn't have raised $40 million. I probably wouldn't have the revenue I had. I wouldn't be profitable at all. And so why I mention that is I do think there is an aspect of, and I think it's good, having good governance is really important, but I think really balancing out a founder to founder stage and really being able to, because as a VC you have so much influence on that, and the power dynamic is so real, and it can be very dangerous to founders.
Yeah, I think your point is a very important one. The reality is that no matter how involved a VC is or thinks they are in a company, the founder is always the expert, right? The founder is always going to know more. Even if this is a VC who built a company in the space in the past, it doesn't matter. They don't have the context that you have. So it's a very good point that VC should know, but more importantly, founders should understand, right? VCs are just cheerleaders, spectators, advisors, don't have nearly enough context as you do as a founder.
Yeah. I think in my opinion, what I've kind of learned, one of my board members, Shield Tile, like he's been fantastic. And I think really he does this really well. Really good VCs, in my opinion, ask you really good questions and help you get to the solution. Like, so every time, big challenge, I'm like, hey, this is what's going on. He's like, here are the 3 questions I'd ask myself and make a decision when you are happy with the answers. And like, question 1, question 2, question 3. Whatever you decide, I'll support you. But these are 3 I would think about the most. He never tells me, no, do this, no, do that. But he'll challenge me. Of course, he holds me to high expectations. Like, what's revenue like? Are we growing? Or are we growing fast? Like, and it's good. It's a healthy balance. But he never tells me, no, you should only do this. And I think it's very, very refreshing having a board member like that, because when I go to board meetings, I'm not scared. I'm ready to talk about the challenges openly. I'm like, okay, we messed up here. We made this decision. It cost us this money. We lost this, whatever. Okay, well, here's how we're thinking about solving this. What do you think? It's like, these are the 2 things I'd ask myself and then make the decision based on that. But if Benji, I trust you. You understand the market really well, more than I do. I'm not the expert in fintech and cross-border payments. He's like, I invest in a bunch of companies. I can initiate a bunch of founders. But ultimately, the problem, the best, and exactly how you described it.
Have you had tough board meetings?
No, not. I mean, challenges here and there. I think when we had to make the call to become profitable, I think I've not even discussed it with you. I'm not even sure he thought we'd become profitable by the time we did. But yeah, I think I was like, look, let's focus on generating cash, and let's push. And I think that rallying the whole company around it was probably the harder task, because it seemed impossible.
Benji, amazing conversation. Thanks. I learned a lot, and I know you're going places.
Thank you. That's very kind.
Thank you.
Thanks for tuning in. I hope you enjoyed this great episode with Benjamin, CEO of NYCA. If you want more interviews, make sure to subscribe, follow, and leave a review on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or whatever you get your shows. It helps and means a lot. If you have any suggestions or thoughts about the show, just drop me a line on Twitter or LinkedIn. Signing off till next week, I'm your host, Miguel Armaza. The Fintech Leaders podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be considered financial or investment advice.